This paragraph 32 is seller, that's where what's going to be filled out if the buyer wants the seller to provide a home warranty, and the cost of the home warranty will be. And a lot of us will put a range in there that it'll say like $450 to $500 or whatever it might be. Please check the price of the home warranties. If you're talking about $800,000 and $900,000 houses with more than one furnace, more than one air conditioner, and a hot tub, and all the rest of it, it's going to be more than $500. So you want to verify what that price is going to be. This is the well or sanitary system inspections. If in fact there is a well or a septic on the property, this outlines how the well and septic is going to be performed, who's going to pay for it, and what's going to happen if there is a deficiency. This is the termite inspection paragraph, only used when the seller is going to pay for the termite inspection. So it's going to be used on a VA contract for sure. It would be used in some marketplaces. It is customary for the seller to pay for the termite inspection. That is not a law, that's just a custom. So check with your managing brokers, but most of the time you're not going to be using this one. That's why these are in optional paragraphs. They're not used that often. This is the possession after closing. So if the seller is going to stay in the property after the closing for some reason, and we've got two options, they're going to stay in the property X number of days after the closing, or there's a specific date by which they are going to move out. Seller is going to be responsible for the utilities, the contents, the liability insurance, the maintenance expenses, and he's going to deposit an amount of money at the closing to ensure that he moves out. And then A comes into the sum of how much per day for use and occupancy. So my seller is going to stay in your buyer's house for 3 days after the closing because they couldn't close on their new house for 3 days. Okay, it just came out that way. So we're going to hold 2% of my seller's proceeds out of the closing in an escrow account. Somebody will hold it, and you're going to be charging my seller some per diem. In other words, how much per day? That, what goes in line 477, needs to be factored on your buyer's mortgage payment, not my seller's payment. And this gets the sellers all angry. They're going, wait a minute, my mortgage payment's only $800 a month. And you're telling me I've got to pay. And seriously, it's only $800 a month. They've been living in the house for, what, a zillion years. And your buyer came in and his mortgage payment on the house is, what, $1,800 a month. And his taxes are, do you know what I mean? And all of the rest of that stuff. A lot of times these are seniors. They're they need to get their kids here to help them move them out. They've got a senior freeze. It really gets kind of ugly. They don't always understand. So listing agents, prepare your sellers if they're going to stay in the property after the closing, that this money they're paying is not their per diem cost, it's the buyer's per diem cost. So it can get really bad. And then if they don't move out on time, we're going to charge them 3 times that amount. That's just to make sure they move out. Not the old people, that's just the people who don't want to move out. So the next one that's on there is the as-is condition. If you have a seller who is saying they're going to sell as is, we see this in estate sales, we see it in short sales, we see it in a lot of different circumstances. It does not always mean that the seller is hiding things. It just means the seller doesn't have a clue of what's going on. This basically says that the buyer's buying it as is. He will have a home inspection done, just like he would normally do, 5 business days. And all he does is stay or go. He is either going to stay in the property, or he's either going to stay in the contract and buy the property, or he is going to back out of the contract. That's his only 2 options. He does not come back to the seller and say, I would like you to fix this, this, and this. No, that's not how it works with as is. Now, when I come back and say to you, my buyer is withdrawing from the contract based on the home inspection. When you come to me and say, my seller wants to know, is there anything that if they fixed it, the buyer would stay? Now we can negotiate. Does that make sense? It's got to come from the seller's side, because it's not up to the buyer, because the buyer has agreed they're either going to stay or they're going to go. That's the only options they have. This is a specified party approval, certainly not used very often, but this is when, for example, you have a transferee buyer and he is here, but his wife is not. And he wants to put a contract in on the property. He's pretty darn sure she's going to be fine with it, but he wants to fly her in to make sure she can see the property. We're saying we need 5 business days to get that specified party to be here. I've used it twice. I used it only twice. I've used it once when a builder friend of mine's daughter was buying a house and I sold her the house. She was not going to have a home inspector do the home inspection. She was going to have her dad do it. In my opinion, he's been a builder for 35 years. He was probably a better judge of what was good for his daughter than anybody else was going to be. And we put his name in there as the specified party. We did not have a home inspection done. We had her dad do it. Everything went fine. Now, you got to know that if your dad had come up with stuff that was wrong with it, that doesn't necessarily mean we can go back to the seller and ask to have it fixed. It was just he either approves it or he doesn't. Now, the other one was my buyer's psychic. All right, you can just take it for what she would not buy a house until her psychic took a look at it. So the psychic had to come in and put hands on the walls and walk around the property and make sure everything was okay. And now that you're all done laughing, we can just move on. But I just wanted to give you some examples of how you can use the specified party approval. This is if there are any attachments that are going to be incorporated into this contract. So this could be a variety of different things, but one of them might be the FHA or VA or USDA addendum might go on there. So if there's any attachments that might need to be attached to the contract, then that is where we would put them. This last one is the miscellaneous provisions. If any of these, if we're doing an articles of agreement, a short sale, a multi-unit, 4 units or fewer, if we're doing any of these things, we can't write up a contract for this. They are too, there's nothing that's the same for everything. So we have some addendums that we can use on this, but in many cases, for example, if we were doing an articles of agreement or purchase money mortgage, we don't do any of that. The attorneys have to write all of that up. So there's other stuff that has to, a tax deferred exchange, there's no way other than identifying the property, etc. So that's just if in fact there was other things that were going to be done beyond the agreement of the terms of the contract. This is where I mentioned to you before that the buyer's names and address are now required. And if we do not put them in there so they can be read by all parties, we are going to have a problem. Because we as agents will then be taking notice for our clients. So we just want to make sure that everything is in there. The date of the offer is when we wrote it. The date of acceptance is when the last of the parties have put their final initial and signatures and it has been delivered. So arguably the last date of acceptance, when they put their last initials and signatures, get it delivered right away, or we're going to have an argument about whether or not what the date of acceptance is. So it's usually the listing agent who has the contract. The seller is usually the one that signs last. So when I hear stories of the date of acceptance was the 1st and it wasn't delivered to the buyer agent until the 3rd, it is the listing agent's responsibility. That should have been delivered on the 1st because now we're going to have the attorney come in and make an immediate modification to change the date of acceptance to the 3rd. Because if you remember how many times in this tutorial I have said to you that this is 5 days after the date of acceptance, 10 days after the date of acceptance. So when you as a listing agent do not get this contract delivered back to the buyer agent, you are creating a situation where we're going to have to modify the date of acceptance because otherwise it eats into the buyer's time for everything. So make sure you're getting this thing delivered as quickly as you possibly can. This is for information only. This is for us, and please, even though it's information only, fill it in if you've got it, because this helps us move forward. Sometimes you don't know who the attorneys are yet. That's all fine and good, but you might know who the lender is. You might know who, and you would know who the association is if it's a condo or whatever. So make sure that you're giving us as much information as you can. And down at the bottom, to protect the listing agent as well as the buyer agent, because the license law says that we have to present all offers in a timely manner. And this protects you as a listing agent so that the seller cannot come back and say they didn't get all offers. But it also protects the buyer agent because the buyer is requesting verification his offer was presented. So what we're saying here is that this offer was presented to the seller on date and time and rejected on a date and time, and the seller's initials, because that's how we make sure that all of the offers got presented to the sellers. It is really in everybody's best interest that we do that. So that took us through the contract.